This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast that always stops at Costco before inviting a large crowd over. I'm Grayson Peltier. So today I want to talk about homelessness, which is an issue that I had discussed on a prior episode in response to a listener question. And in that episode, I discussed how some of the efforts that are being done to help the homeless aren't necessarily being executed in the right way. And the issue of why there are people that choose to stay on the streets is because the services aren't very good. They're bad conditions, they don't treat them well, or the services are just not available. There are too many conditions that are put on things. They're put in places that are more dangerous and less safe than staying on the streets. Issues with crime and abuse and stuff like that. Serious problems. And there's an example of this happening right now in LA. There's a program that I think has a lot of positives to it and a lot of great potential. And it's better than a lot of the other homeless services that have been offered out there. But there are some serious issues with it. It's the Inside Safe program launched by new LA Mayor Karen Bass, which puts people who are homeless and living in a encampment, in certain specific encampments. It's not available to everybody. It's only for certain encampments. It puts them into a hotel room, and they stay in that hotel or motel location, presumably until they get permanent housing. And they've promised that they would be allowed to stay until they get permanent housing of some sort, which is really positive. And that's a lot better than the typical shelter model, the warehouse shelter where you have like a bed with no privacy in the middle of just like a large room with a bunch of people in there, just with like cots, all just like you're just sleeping around each other, no privacy at all, feels like a prison. Those kinds of things that a lot of jurisdictions have tried are just atrocious, and they've had their own problems with, obviously, because you have so many people in such close quarters, you have problems between people that can arise at certain times, and people sometimes will feel safer on the streets, especially when you're dealing with situations of domestic abuse, those types of problems. And this program seems really good because it presumably gives you a private room. And there's supposed to be some sort of permanent housing that's going to come out, and also mental health services, all kinds of other wraparound assistance is also supposed to be part of Inside Safe. But what went wrong here is a bunch of very little easily solvable things that are just not getting solved. And I think there's one thing that comes down to why these things aren't getting solved. And I think it has to do with the approach and the attitude to which homeless services are undertaken. They are undertaken in a way that, in my opinion, basically fails sales and marketing 101. They don't treat the people who are homeless, who are unhoused, who are in these situations with the level of courtesy and the level of service that really should be expected in this type of situation. And I think that there are certain reasons for that. And some of it is kind of fundamental to the culture and fundamental to the way that capitalism has programmed us to view people who are lesser than each other. And to not necessarily view somebody as an equal. But these issues that have come up are rather simple, very like obvious things that if you were providing a service to somebody else, or if you're trying to sell a service to somebody else, would immediately come up. Like keeping people without food an entire day while they're going through processing and lines and waiting in places, promising things and just not delivering on them, having somebody who's like in the hospital. One example is somebody who's in the hospital getting an amputation surgery, had a tent in one of these encampments, and what they did was they just went and instead of giving him a hotel room, he contacted the organization running the Inside Safe. They said, yeah, you'll get a hotel room, but apparently because he was in the hospital getting an amputation surgery, he didn't get a hotel room. and they just took his tent and threw it in the trash. And even after they promised it to him, and not giving people food all day long, leaving people waiting for long periods of time, putting people in hotel and motel rooms that have roaches, that have all kinds of sanitary issues, not giving people like adequate toiletries. You have like restrictions that are sort of prison-like or jail-like, where there are curfews and they're not allowed to have their own room key. There are people that are stuck in there. They can't get out of there, even though there are people that are homeless, and people don't realize this, but they have jobs, and they lose their jobs because they can't leave the place. All kinds of issues like that are honestly relatively easy to solve, but they just don't get solved. And I think that we have to view this as an exchange. We have to view this as similar to an actual like an actual business transaction, like you have a customer on the other end of it. Because the private sector has like temporary housing stuff that happens all the time. Like I had a water leak in my house, and I got a extended stay hotel I went to. Great experience, not a problem, very good, no issues. And the insurance company took care of everything in a very good way. So we know that housing people temporarily who are affected by something is something that's doable. It's not like we're asking to move heaven and earth necessarily. But the same level of courtesy that is afforded to me, a relatively privileged person, whose expenses for my stay was being paid for by a private company, is not what's going on when it's in this public system. And of course, that's how public services and stuff like that tend to go, unfortunately. What we have to think about is that the people who are unhoused in this situation have something to give in exchange, which this program actually explicitly in the way it's designed to be, you exchange your tent that you're using to live outside to get a hotel room. And there is a little bit of a wacky issue there, which is that sometimes people will be sharing tents with people that they don't know, like some other person who maybe they don't get along with. And sometimes they don't have enough hotel rooms, and somehow people are getting paired with the abuser that they were abused by in a domestic violence situation, which that's just atrocious. That's like totally unacceptable. I don't know who on earth would approve that, but that apparently is happening. According to the group that is bringing up these grievances. The group involved in bringing out these grievances, there are multiple organizations, mostly mutual aid groups involved, but they have a website called InsideStarving.com, and it's called that because these people will be left in these hotel rooms without any food for extended periods of time, or very little food. And what is really, I think that the first thing is to move out of sort of this coercive, you have to go kind of attitude, and like seeing it as either like a benevolent type of control, or like a police or a governmental type, or like a law enforcement type control situation. Because the program's supposed to be voluntary. It's supposed to be a voluntary thing, but apparently there's law enforcement involved and other things that are not quite making it voluntary, and people's tents that are getting trashed and removed even when they're in the hospital, stuff like that. But we have to return to, and this is also something that the people who are advocating for the unhoused communities need to understand that this is an exchange. There is something that is valuable, which is the return of the public space to the community, from removing the tents from these encampments, from these communities that are bothering them quite a bit. And that's something that is being taken care of. So there is an exchange here. This isn't some sort of just pure act of charity. And I think that that's why when the organizations say, well, no, we don't want to have a policy where you have to give up your tent. I think that giving up the tent part, I think that's not quite problematic, or at least it's the least problematic thing about this program, because then it's an exchange, and that puts that into focus. What right now, the way that they see it, is that the people who are involved in these homeless service efforts is the people who do this work, I'm sure, care a lot about these people, but sort of like a very intrinsic, very subtle attitudinal shift that needs to be made is that they see their customer as being the people in the community who are adversely affected by the encampments. They're like, okay, we're doing a service, we're doing a job to get rid of this encampment for the people who live in this neighborhood, which that's part of it. I think that's part of it. Of course, when the groups make their demands, they're not going to acknowledge this in any way because they have to come in strong, part of the kayfabe, and they have to come in strong with their moral argument, and that's fine. But in reality, we do recognize that a lot of this is about cleaning up these communities so that members of the community who are not the person who is unhoused in the tent can use that public space again. And my background really, my approach to things tends to be a little bit different than people that work on the political side. A lot of people who work on the political side or on the social services side kind of adopt sort of a mindset of patronizing control. For me, my background is a combination of policy expertise and marketing and sales knowledge, which is somewhat uncommon in this whole social service space. And I think that needs to be applied to communicating with the people who are there. A lot of times when we're talking about like private sector philanthropy, they see their customer as just being the donors, and the only people who actually know how to market well and talk and negotiate with people are the people who work with donors, not necessarily the people who are doing services, which is ridiculous, because you don't want this patronizing, inconsiderate attitude to be part of this. People want to be treated as equals. You wouldn't treat if somebody invited you, if you invited somebody over to your house, you wouldn't just leave them there for hours and hours and hours. You wouldn't not attend to them. You'd make sure that things are set up for them. I was only slightly joking a little bit about that Costco remark at the beginning of the episode. But it's you take care of them. You feed them. You make sure that they're comfortable, and you're asking people who distrust your institution already, who don't have a good relationship with the institutions of the government, the homeless service organizations, certainly the sanitation and the law enforcement they don't have a good relationship with. You're asking them to trust you. And when you're trying to sell something to somebody, you're also asking them to trust you. As a marketer, you're trying to get people to do something that they don't necessarily want to do. You're trying to get people to part with their money in a way that they maybe didn't want to before they heard your messaging. And we don't have the ability to hold a gun to somebody's head to make them buy a product. Obviously, the government, I think, kind of in these homeless situations leans too much on that use of force. Maybe sometimes if somebody's doing something actually criminal or harmful to other people, then you have to take action about it. But when you're trying to get somebody to agree to services, you have to treat it like that, like it's a customer, like it's somebody that you actually genuinely want to help, or even if it's a friend, somebody that you want to do something good for, not somebody who's a subject or some sort of cog in a machine. And these homeless service workers, one of the things that happened is that the people who were running this thing, they made sure to get lunch orders and breakfast orders and bring in donuts and all of that for the homeless service workers, but they have these people outside waiting forever and ever to go through this process or waiting to get into the hotel and whatever, and they didn't keep them fed all day long. That's a simple thing. And one of the things you have to understand is that the homeless community, I've talked about this a little bit on a few prior episodes, but the homeless community does stick together. They have a sort of solidarity with each other. They talk to each other. they're cooperating with each other in certain ways, and they've gone to some of these mutual aid groups up in LA, and they have and they formed a bond with some of the people in these groups. And they will get to know, people are always like, okay, there are these stubborn homeless people who won't accept services. But just like in any sort of marketing or sales situation, any business that's selling a product, people have friend groups and communities who will say, oh yeah, this company did me right. They did something good for me. I like the service. I like the product. I like the food. I like the experience, the entertainment I had at this place. I like this place that did my car repair. It's the same thing with homeless services. If people have a positive impression of the services you're providing, they are going to say good things about it to the people that they know. And homeless people do talk to each other. And I think that a lot of service providers just completely forget about that. There's word of mouth. There may not be a Yelp, but there is, even now that a lot of them have gotten access to smartphones or internet access through libraries or through the Affordable Connectivity Program, those types of programs, which that's a necessity oftentimes to find and keep a job. They're talking to each other. They're even texting these mutual aid groups, and they're telling them about the bad things that are going on in these programs. Like, there are text message threads on that InsideStarving.com of like saying they've had to move people multiple times around there. There are people that only got one $50 gift card for food. They've been calling, and the organization St. Joseph's that's running some of these Inside Safe locations, asking for food, and then they didn't get anything, and they had to beg on the phone. It's a bad experience. And they're talking about the roaches that they're seeing in these places. They're hearing like all kinds of sounds in the walls from like insects and vermin and all kinds of stuff like that. Not having sufficient toiletries, going to unsafe, not clean locations. People that haven't gotten their medicine, people that are supposed to get mental health services that aren't getting them. Word gets out. And if you want to solve this problem, if you want your end of the bargain to be held up, you want to get rid of these encampments. And you have to talk to people. And this is the part for the advocates, is that myself, as somebody who is both a marketer and a communications consultant for activists and political organizations, if they were my client, I would tell them, well, look, obviously you keep your demands, you keep them strong, you keep going, you keep that going, but you need to understand that you're also giving them something in return. The people that you're representing, the unhoused people in these communities, have something that the remainder of the community, the remainder of the taxpayers want, which is to get rid of those encampments. And that is leverage in a way. But don't go too far. You have to act responsibly too. There are some claims that are going out there. They're from these organizations. They're saying that some of these homeless mutual aid groups are telling people to stay on the street and not accept the rooms, and that just makes them seem like bad people who are negotiating in bad faith. So there is a balance there. There's a delicate balance in the game theory of all of this to make it work. And I think that needs to be emphasized in some of these discussions. And this is supposed to be a voluntary program. And the only way that the voluntary program is going to work is if you actually start doing the little things right. Like making sure people are fed. Heck, I would make sure that when they show up to these encampments, if I was working for these homeless service organizations where they hired me as a consultant, I would tell them, make everything feel amazing. You want to make the people that you're talking to, that you're trying to convince to do this deal with you, to get their tent out of the community so that the local residents can have their public space back. You want to make them feel good about what they're doing. You want to make them feel great. Like, this is a really great decision. You want to butter them up, and you want to even give them a nice meal. Even when you show up there, make sure you have a nice meal set up for them. This is simple, easy stuff that is not going to cost you that much money. You want to have a nice meal set up for them. You want to have a nice bag, like one of the demands from the groups, which is super logical, is have a nice bag with all the toiletries, the sanitation supplies that you need. toothpaste, toothbrush, that kind of stuff that you need if you're going into a hotel room. That is simple stuff. And if you see those little bits of actually showing like you care about the person are going to get them to want to accept it more than just like here's a trash truck that's going to come right in and grab your stuff right now. And here all these trash sanitation workers are going to throw everything out. Everything that's your life, we're seeing that as that's just trash that has to get removed. Sure, there's trash that has to get removed. Trash has to be cleaned up. But if you want the people to feel good about what they're doing, you want them to agree to it, then you have to treat them as such. If somebody tried to sell you some sort of product or service, somebody tried to get you to sell your house and they were treating you badly, I don't think you do the deal. And especially if they're not giving you what you expected in return. And there's an issue where a lot of these people that are in these that are being taken to these motels, they're not being told what motel they're going to, not being told the location. A lot of them will have jobs in the area and they can't get back to their job because they're too far away, and there's not clear communication, not clear written information of where they're going, or sometimes they'll be abruptly moved from one location to another without notice. Those are the kinds of things, again, super simple. Tell them, give them all the information they need in writing, give it all to them ahead of time, plan these things ahead of time, and actually talk to people in a way that makes you seem trustworthy, which is really the part that just keeps getting failed over and over and over again. And to make up for the lack of care, courtesy, consideration, and actually selling this as being a good thing to the target population, then you just bring in coercion, then you bring in like sweeps and law enforcement and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that there's never a place for that. Again, if somebody's being violent, if they're doing damage to somebody else, you have to stop that. But you have to start with actually showing them that you're giving something that they want to have. The fact that this is for certain encampments only, I think allows an opportunity to make it seem like this is an exclusive thing. One of the key things that, like, when you're doing any sort of marketing, you want to make the person on the other end of it feel special. You want to make them feel like this is something that only I get. This is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. This is an opportunity that doesn't come around very often. If you've gone to any sort of sale, that's how it feels. They should do that here. They're like, and make the whole atmosphere and the environment of it like, we really, really care about you. We really want to help you. And this is an opportunity. This is a special opportunity. I know that there are some of the advocates were saying that the workers are making false promises. Of course, don't make false promises, but make the people feel special. Feed them, give them what they need to make them feel like this is a good thing to do. You don't need to break out the force and all of that stuff without at least trying to persuade. And that's the thing, is a lot of people feel in government and in these organizations feel like they don't need to persuade anybody. They should be lucky that they're even getting a room, which it's a good thing. They are lucky to get a room, but you need to still at least treat them with some sort of dignity. And you could even just go and start just doing all these things of like making it feel more special, more like it's a real experience. You can do stupid stuff like obviously you want to have plenty of staff. There are times when people are just left alone with no staff attending to them. And sometimes sometimes these programs do have like more secure environments. I guess you can say that the advocates say are a little bit more carceral, and that's not a good thing. But if you have to have safety type measures in place, you have to have more staff involvement, make it seem like the staff involvement is some sort of positive. Like, call the people who work on these things concierges or something like that. Make the people feel good about what's going on. Like that they're doing extra stuff to care for them. Like it's a feature and not a bug. But of course, making people feel good means giving people the autonomy that they need. And that should be, if you can do that, then that should be what you do. In some cases, though, you do need to control situations for sanitation, make sure things are clean when people are coming in from the street, make sure that there isn't drug deals or crime going on outside. But a lot of unhoused communities that have decided to stay in encampments, is because they felt like the other shelters were just not controlling those kinds of issues. So controlling those kinds of issues and making sure that it's a safe environment can be seen as a positive, but you have to do it in a way that makes it seem positive. And when you have these types of programs, there is a media narrative outside of this narrative within the homeless community. And I think that's, again, something that's been forgotten, is the fact that there is a narrative, there is a discourse. Whenever you do something, just like if there's something that's going on in your community that's happening, you're going to post on social media, you're going to talk to other people you know. There is that narrative, there is that discourse within the unhoused communities too. But outside of that, there's the greater narrative to the general mass media that's going on. And of course, legislators, they want to look good and say, oh yes, Karen Bass, I'm a new mayor, I'm taking care of homelessness, we're really helping these people. If you have cracks in the system like this, that you're not going to maintain that good positive rapport with the overall community. If the people especially the advocacy groups, go to the media and say, well, look, this isn't working. But a lot of times, and I've noticed this in the overall discourse around homelessness, especially in Los Angeles, people are like, I don't care. I just want them gone from my neighborhood. This is a threat to my children. There are needles all over the place. It's dirty. There's disease, and my children can't play outside. So just do whatever you have to get rid of them. And that maybe feeds into some of the harshness that some of these people who work in this field have, is because they feel like they're being pressured by their true client here, which is the people in these communities that are complaining about it. Like they're being pressured, but you have to temper that. You have to act in a way that you're being responsible and responsive to both. And you have to still, though, obviously, some of the advocates were saying, well, no, when council members come and try to help out, there should be no cameras. One of the lists of demands said that. And then they said that there shouldn't be a focus on aesthetics, but on the humanity of the people there, which, yes, on a fundamental moral principled ground, yes, you should be focusing on the needs of the people that are there. But the reality, we have to work with reality here. The reality is that most people in the communities, it seems like, or at least a growing number of them, only care about getting rid of the aesthetic problem and the safety hazard posed by the encampments, not necessarily about giving the homeless people what they want. But you want to set it up as, and this is to the advocates here, this is the means to get you what you want. You've got to give the people what they want. This is how you give the people what they want. And they should be allowed. They're saying no cameras when the council members come over. If they're doing a good job, if they're doing something good, then let them get the recognition from it. Again, I'm a little bit biased as a communications consultant, but if the council members and everybody involved is doing the right thing, then heck, let them have their photo op. Of course, privacy, all of that stuff. You want to protect people's privacy. But if they're doing the right thing, then why not let them show it off? I know they're not doing the right thing now, but hopefully that'll get resolved. And that's the goal here. The goal is not to keep people on the streets. And sometimes there is this very, very small group that within the mutual aid, more radical homeless advocacy community that some have accused of basically wanting to keep them on the streets and keep the nuisance there until there's perfect affordable housing, permanent housing, and not allowing them and telling people that are homeless to not go to a hotel temporarily or a motel or take these arrangements. And I think that's ridiculous. Word gets out, the narrative gets out, even if you're trying to keep it contained. You want to be part of the solution and not a part of the problem. You're not going to, if you take a super unreasonable stance in negotiation, just like when some of the other communities do homeless services where they're like, get away from this location and you have to, or else you have to go into this shelter with just a cot, with like hundreds of other people in one warehouse. When they give that unreasonable position, that's not going to cause the unhoused people to move. If you take the position that until we have permanent housing built, they're not going to get off the streets, then that's not going to help either. And that is also an unreasonable position that's not going to look good for the overall narrative. That being said, I did want to go through some of the inside starving groups' demands in regards to this situation and kind of break them down a little bit. And I'm going to start to sort of call balls and strikes on this a little bit, so we can see kind of fantasy book how we can solve this situation. So on their website, it does say here that in inside safe operations, participants wait for hours, days, and sometimes weeks from the time caseworkers announce the program to an offer of shelter. Once the program is in full swing, they must give up their tent for a motel room and the one tent for one room rule. This dangerous exchange places domestic abuse victims with their abusers, forces platonic campmates to share rooms, sometimes with just one bed, and completely disregards vehicle dwellers. Yeah, the one tent, one room, I get the exchange part of it, but I think it's a little too dogmatic to say one tent, one room. So I'll agree with them on that. Giving up their tent, yeah, but it's for room for a person. And then, of course, if you have like smaller children or whatever, people want to stay in like the same room, like a married couple, whatever, that's sure. But a person should get a room, and not their own bed if they're staying in the same room. And it says here, after giving up their tent, participants are cleared from their encampment and loaded on a bus, often without a clue where they're headed. When they arrive at the first motel, there is typically no one to greet them, no orientation or information, and no food. Some placements have carceral rules like lice checks, a 10 p.m. curfew, a 2-bag limit, no visitors, no visiting each other's rooms, bag checks, and pat-downs. Others lack basic hygiene items, towels, bedding. In one, participants can hear roaches crawling in the walls when they turn off their lights at night. Again, this is the simple stuff. The simple stuff. You don't want to put all these ridiculous rules in place when you can do temporary housing, you can do safe temporary housing without doing this kind of stuff. And then of course, no information, no one there to greet them, that kind of stuff. Again, simple. You have people there to help people out. If this was you, if this was your situation, if this was you that was displaced from your home for some reason, is this how you'd want to be treated? No. But the people who work in these things, the people who are in government, kind of lose sight of that. And they're just like, we just need the quickest possible way to get this fixed. So they're not even taking the proper attitude toward the customer experience, so to speak. But they do have the main website. I was talking about there's some Google Docs linked on this Inside Starving website as well. But the main website has a set of demands on here. There are 10 of them here, actually. Yeah, 10. It says here, Inside Safe must be a completely voluntary program with no BS, lies, tricks, or promises that can't be met. People must be allowed the choice. I agree with that. I agree with that. You want to, at least at the beginning, you want to make this thing totally voluntary, and you want to make them feel good. Again, you want to make them feel good about their decision. You want to make them feel like, no, I'm not being forced to do this. This is something that I'm doing because I want to do it, because this is a really good thing. Even if you know that encampment has to be cleared out, then you just show them, look, everybody else, the people at that encampment probably all talk to each other. Look, this person went and they had a great experience, and they're getting into their housing. They're in a room. They're safe. They're comfortable. Another thing, and I forgot to mention this before, but people were saying they didn't have enough blankets, and these mutual aid groups have been getting, in addition to them having to get the food, they're having to get blankets and all the pillows, that kind of stuff, like the basic stuff that you'd expect in a hotel room. Just do that basic stuff right, and more people will want to come. Abolish the one tent for one room rule. I agree. People are not tents. Yeah, each person should get their own room out of this. You have to give up the tent, yeah, because that's the exchange. But I agree there. Give unhoused people the details of the program in the writing. I already covered that. Duration of the stay, the location, services provided. The motel placement must be located within 5 miles of the participants' encampment and must not be infested with pests. Agree totally on the latter part. Former part, within 5 miles. Sometimes I don't know if it's possible every single time to get within 5 miles. If you wind up, you can't find enough rooms within 5 miles of it, then at least if you tell them where it is, and let them decide, I think it's fine to have a further distance, but try as best as possible to get close by, because these people are possibly living in that area because they're trying to get to a job. The motel must not have any unnecessarily restrictive carceral rules. Of course, I agree there, except for like whatever's necessary for safety. If there's some sort of safety concern, then do it, but do it in a way that makes it feel good. Try to make it feel like this is for your benefit in some way, not in a rude, cold, uncaring way, the way that these workers have been doing it. Again, if this was you in this situation, if you were like me and you were out of your house because you had a water leak or whatever, would you want the people who are taking care of you and putting you up in a hotel to treat you this way? No. The motel must not limit the number of belongings people can bring with them. Supposedly they're providing storage for extra belongings, but they're not telling people about it. They should definitely provide storage and make it more clear. Again, more clear, better communication about the extra storage. I can kind of understand if you can't fit all the stuff in the room, but if you can fit it in the room reasonably, then that should be fine. Adequate food must be provided at every step of the process, including at the inside safe operation. People must be provided with nourishing meals or enough money to access nourishing meals themselves. 100%. This is easy. Again, people are going to feel good if you show up to the encampment and you at least, like in the morning when you're doing this thing, at least give them like the whole like Ramada continental breakfast type thing. Actually, I don't know if Ramada Inns have continental breakfast. I'm more of a Hilton guy, but total side note there. But you know what I'm talking about. Have even make it a nice setup with food for them. Or even if you're trying to get them to get on the bus to go to this location, you maybe give them their brown bag meal once they're on the bus. But people feel better when you feed them. They'll be more likely to do what you want them to do if they feel good in some way. That's why you take clients out to lunch. Provide the wraparound care and mental health services the mayor promised both the inside safe participants and the people who choose to stay behind. Yeah, they got to get the services that are promised. And a lot of the people, and this is a win-win on the mental health services especially, a lot of the people that have these very antagonistic attitudes towards homeless people are saying, well, it's because they have mental problems. They need to get help for the mental problems before you give them housing. So at least follow through on that. That's something both you, your constituents, and the homeless advocacy people agree on. And then, of course, and the people who choose to stay behind. I think that the services may have to be different for people who choose to stay behind versus those who go into the program, because I think their needs will probably be different and the way you administer it is different. You probably want to leave some incentive, but adequate services that make the program seem enticing and that build a good, positive relationship and make the people who stay behind want to possibly consider coming in to the program. You want to make it again. If they go through the mental health treatment, they're like, this therapy is really helping me. The psychiatrist is really helping me. This is really good. These people are really good people. You want to make them feel that way. And then they're like, oh yes, maybe I should leave the encampment and come to one of these motel sites. Do not implement 41.18 zones for those who choose to remain at the encampment. We want house keys, not handcuffs. This is basically saying don't arrest people for choosing to remain at the encampment. Don't enforce like loitering laws there. And I would say, yeah, for a period of time while you're attempting to persuade people to leave, then yeah, you don't want to lead with law enforcement and an arrest and a criminal record. You want to lead with, we're really trying to help you, and this is a really good thing for you to do, and this is going to be so amazing if you decide to come over to one of these sites. Obviously, at some point, again, if people become harmful in some way and they're just not taking the help, then that's going to be a different story. But I think that there's hope even for those people if you actually treat people right and you do all the right things to begin with. People are going to be reasonable, especially if giving them the mental health help. They're going to start to think positively when they see positive things happen, and when they see positive things happen to the people that they have grown attached to in this community and grown a bond with and wanting to listen to. I am definitely going way above the amount of time that I expected for this episode, so thank you so much for taking the time to listen. This was definitely pretty messy, a lot messier than I expected of an episode. If you have any feedback, any input, if you're going through a bad situation with government, employers, whoever, you want me to break it down, give some analysis on it, or if you just want to vent to me, whether it's related to this or not, call into the toll-free number, leave a message anytime, day or night, 844-477-7865, 844-477-PUNK. If you are in the advocacy business, if you're involved in any sort of efforts to advocate for any cause or issue, if you're a business that's focused on social responsibility, or if you're leading any sort of nonprofit effort and you want to know how to communicate and engage with all stakeholders well, then please check out offspeedsolutions.com, my consulting practice, taking new clients, and I'd be happy to discuss with you your advocacy, communications, and business support needs and help you achieve your goals and the impact that you want to see. So that's offspeedsolutions.com. Always follow the social media. TikTok and Instagram are at FixerPunk. Twitter is at Grayson Nation. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you'll choose to join me again for the next episode.